Who asked you? A video where I just look up subjects that I'm interested in. Years ago, someone asked me a very specific question, which I no longer have a copy of anymore. So it amounted to, instead of telling us what we can't do, why don't the laws and, more importantly, the police forces and the powers that be tell us what they want us to do? You know, like, you don't want us to have this really weird array of guns that you don't want us to have. Okay, tell us what we can have. If we told you, you know, what we want you to do and you go ahead and do it, we wouldn't have any power over you. You'd be following orders and we couldn't, you know, terrorize you. That was my response. But on firearms, this actually came up to a set of questions that never got answered because the legal system is not there to answer your questions. It's to create more problems and questions for you to comply with. I'm going to bring up a bunch of random stuff. This is mostly a data dump on firearms, but I also have videos on other subjects like automobiles, but the firearms seems to be the more rabbit hole-ish. I'm done with cars, by the way. To be legal, any firearm with a bore diameter greater than 1/2 inch must be determined by the Attorney General and or some other group to be of the following groups of things. They made some limited ones here. Pyrotechnic, line throwing, safety, or signaling, or other similar devices. Usually called signaling devices or non-projectile devices or non-weapon firearms. These are neither designed nor redesigned to be able or even be likely to be used as a weapon and deemed beneficial to society in some way. Safety devices, usually. Any smoothbore over 50 caliber firearm generally considered for sporting purposes and generally recognized that way as particularly suitable. Or, and this is the funny quote, again, it has to be determined by the Attorney General. A rifle which the owner intended to use solely for sporting purposes. Owner. Now, this is, again, and this is the next part. All of this is based on you using cartridged ammunition. Stuff where it has the following components. A case or casing. Modern metallic or non-metallic cased ammunition that holds together the following components that are needed to do this. A primer to initiate a pressure wave, heat, and compression in a propellant which is burned off at a nearly explosive rate to propel a projectile or projectiles. So it has to have primer, propellant, and projectile, and they have to be connected or collected to each other in a cartridge or metallic cartridge or metallic casing. If it's missing the casing and you have these components and you just simply put them together in a pipe and set it off, that's referred to as a black powder weapon or a muzzleloader. If you have the components separated in some way, but two of them connected, like the projectile has the propellant with it, or you have basically a blank charge in the projectile, legally speaking, those aren't considered a firearm because it's using maybe cased ammunition for a blank, but its projectile is driven by another method. And there are exemptions and exceptions to this. But, you know, anything below 50 caliber is less regulated. And then if you want to know the answer, the least regulated firearm in existence is called a firearm because it's not listed as a long gun, shotgun, or rifle because it doesn't have a buttstock and you have to hold it with two hands. And it's 26 inches long. So it's not short, so it's not a pistol. It's not a legally restricted weapon, and it doesn't have a buttstock on it, so it's not a shotgun. So it doesn't have a bunch of restrictions on it. And it's not considered a pistol because you can't fire it one-handed in a practical way. You'd have to really be pushing the limitations of what you call firing it one-handed. The average person, average prudent person. So the least regulatable firearm in existence is at or below 50 caliber. It can be smoothbore or rifled because it's a long barrel and it's a long gun. Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't have to have a long barrel because since it's not a pistol, because it has to be fired with two hands, it doesn't have a barrel limit, and it can't be a rifle or shotgun because it's missing the buttstock, so you can have any length barrel on it you want to. It's a 26-inch long lower receiver with a barrel stuck on it, any length you want to, and it can be rifled or non-rifled, and as long as it's below 50 caliber, it's not regulated in any real way. And if it's over 50 caliber, it's also not regulated in any way at all either, because it's not considered anything other than a firearm. If it uses cased ammunition, the ammunition becomes the definition of whether it's considered sporting usage or not. And if you want to use non-sporting cartridges, you're allowed to in some very limited cases, because that's been the determination not of the Attorney General, but of the ATF. So yeah, I do actually have the answer now. Right? Oh yeah, there's a bunch of caveats because they're trying to change the laws, because they have to put restrictions on the least restricted item on earth. A pistol grip only shotgun or rifle that's 26 inches long minimum, and you put an 18.5-inch barrel on it, whether it's smoothbore or rifled, so that there's nothing to bitch about. Make it a single shot so they can really get really frustrated. You can see it in their face. It's like driving your car with a speed limiter on it and a governor on your car. No, I can't be speeding. It can't go faster than this amount. You can test it. The frustration of the police officer may actually cause their eyeballs to pop out. Remote trigger pull release system, or just a release system. A lot of videos you see on YouTube, someone's firing a firearm by pulling on a piece of string or cordage, which can cause the gun to move around and fire it in an unsafe way. Instead of just pointing the damn thing into the ground on a brace that holds it straight down, pointing it into a hole in the ground, or even lowering it into it, and just using a remote control to pull the trigger in such a way that it is not pulling on it. I'm going to bring up my favorite one for cost and stupid proofing. Electric triggers. Extensible based on using the idea of a paintball gun's triggering system, which is literally an electric trigger. It's nothing else. It uses a solenoid. Use a 6 or 9 volt or 12 volt electric solenoid. It's an electromagnet that just pulls the trigger, $5. And you can put the battery with it or at the other end of a power cable. I'd recommend using outdoor extension cords at $25 for 50 feet. And you just use a clacker switch to set it off. It's legally not regulated at all doing this. It eliminates the ability to pull on it in any way, even hypothetically. And you can make it to where the plug pulls out if you do pull on it by accident. And again, just point it into the ground, and you can even put a chronometer or chronograph or speedometer or bulletometer in the hole with the gun so you can check its speed and test out a bunch of rounds. The other one is to use a 25, 30, or 50 foot or even 100 foot mechanical cable pull. Basically, it's a steel cable inside of a housing. This is the same thing that's used as a throttle or a rudder control on a boat or the thing that's on your old lawnmower. Pretty simple. Price tag's below, but the most expensive combination I could come up with, worst case scenario, for a 100-foot length was around $60. One of them can use a picture hanger wire. You just have to make sure it only pulls, not pulls and pushes. You don't ever want to do that. Or you could use some of the more expensive stuff, but that was the most extreme version of it. But 30 feet ought to do it. But then again, less than $30 for an electromagnet for pulling a trigger. It's very DIY. And you can also just get the parts out of an old paintball gun and re-implement it. It's a trigger pulling system that's built into them. Because paintball guns are allowed to have electric triggers, so you can have it be fully auto. It's a paintball gun. Same thing with airsoft that uses electric drive. A lot of them do. So that's the cable pull, remote pull mechanism for electrical and or mechanical. The mechanical one doesn't require batteries, but most people are doing these things where they're around, one of those 6-volt lantern batteries out of a big flashlight, or you have a car battery to plug into. And if you use the 120-volt extension cables, they have 15-amp limits on them, so they're perfectly fine with this. Just saying. And yeah, you can make a cable where it's missing some of the prongs so you can't plug it in, and just make it from neutral to ground wire, and just use those two wires, and it's not even violating electrical code at that point for at least using this for a remote cable. Now we're going to talk about DIY 12-gauge slug molds. They can be used to make all sorts of things. Ran into a bunch of this on the internet. So basically, the answer is 5/8 socket or a 16mm socket. The outer splines, if it's more than just the 6 sides, if it has like 12 points or 8 points, the point-to-point across max diameter works out to be about right to squeeze through or even just slide through easily most 12 gauges. 73 caliber approximately is about what you need, and that would work. It's actually smaller than that. You can go bigger than that. You can also use an Acorn Nut dropped in it the other way, so it creates a hollow when you pour it into the socket, lead. 12 gauge slug mode, DIY. And you can use a nut and a screw on the other end to tighten that in place. There's hundreds of combinations. You can use a deep socket as well. Cost for these things go for $7 to $8, and they're anywhere from half an inch deep to 1.3 inches deep. So you can just buy the deepest socket for $8 and take advantage of the extra space in the bottom of it to put in a little cone-shaped plug to make the hollow in the back of it, or whatever. And you can use that to punch it out. The chrome lining on them and the fact that they're normally molded means that they're also molded to release easier. Really interesting thing to look up. You can watch people making these. There's lots of DIYing about it. So, yeah, that's about it for the video. So, this is where the video ends, but I can go ahead and bring up another couple of subjects. Length of pull and overall length. 26-inch overall length is the minimum length for it to be considered a long gun or concealability rule. And depending on the configuration, like I brought up, it doesn't matter what the barrel length is or the bore diameter. 18-inch or longer barrels to be on the safe side, the least regulated. And 16 inches for rifled barrels, but they have to be below 50 caliber. And again, exemptions and exceptions are made, but we avoid them. Let's talk about the shockwave. If you ever convert the shockwave from being a firearm only to being a long gun, you're stuck, is the statement you'll hear. Because it was originally designed to be fired without a stock. But you can put an 18-inch barrel on it, then put a stock on it. That gives you 13.5 inches length of pull as a fixed buckstock. All components dimensions meet the definition of a shotgun. And depending on which way the wind blows, you're allowed to then remove the buttstock as long as the whole thing is still 26 inches long, and then change out the barrel for the shorter barrels that are shorter than the legal restriction lengths, and or convert it over to being a fully pistol design, but you want to leave the body really 26 inches long, or minimum. Rifles and shotguns are designed to be held and fired shoulder braced using two hands. A rifle or shotgun, if originally manufactured at over 26 inches long with a shoulder stock and converted to a short barrel and or stock, requires a $200 tax stamp before you even do this, and you got to get permission from the EATF. Now, the word sawn off is what this should really be called because you really are cutting down something, but because things can be accessorized to death, that isn't used anymore, and also that would be clear and straightforward. Originally, this was a rule not having to do with danger or concealability, but with trying to outlaw any pistol. The original National Firearms Act was to get rid of pistols, and then expanded to getting rid of anything concealable, even remotely like a pistol. So 26 inches long was considered the minimum length you could have something be that wouldn't be regulated. And then people realized, well, they could take an old shotgun or a rifle and make it into a pistol length, and they decided to outlaw it. That's where that rule came from. Just thought I'd put that in there so that you have it. There's a bunch of other rules and stuff, and this is where the rabbit hole starts up that I went into. And I did a whole bunch of paragraphs that would have taken a lot longer. But again, these are a bunch of rules about what you can't do. Discussing what you're allowed to do is so much simpler and avoided at all costs by powers that be. Links below in the description along with the full text of all the crap I didn't waste your time with. Thank you, and have a good day.